Welcome to Restoring the Mind. My name is Khalid Mahmood, and today's topic is Israel will be gone in 20 years. The main reason for doing this video is this article that appeared in the American press. It says Israel will be gone in 20 years, says Wilkerson, former State Department aide. Interesting title and interesting concept. The reason he's saying it is because he thinks that Israel won't exist as a state in 20 years because it is delegitimizing itself as an apartheid state. Israel is a strategic liability of the first order for the United States and is the most likely state in the world to take the United States to Armageddon. Interesting. So we're going to the Armageddon. The US ought to tell Israel now to change swiftly or it will cease to fund and protect Israel, but the US will not do so. The neoconservative agenda in the Middle East was to set the Levant on fire, to keep Israel's enemies so at one another's throat, that they could not give Israel trouble. But the question is, who are the Israelis? Where have they come from? How have they come to occupy Palestine? Let's have a look. Israel's early leadership includes David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion was the primary national leader, according to Wikipedia, of the State of Israel, and the first Prime Minister of Israel. Interesting. But where does he come from? David Ben-Gurion was born in Poland. Very interesting. The other famous leaders of Israel include Golda Meir, and she was the Prime Minister of Israel too. Golda Meir was born in Kiev, which is a modern-day Ukraine. Interesting. And another famous leader of Israel is Shimon Peres. He was the president of Israel from 2007 to 2014. And he was born in present-day Belarus. Another famous leader that was actually assassinated was Yitzak Rabin, and he was assassinated because he tried to make peace with the Palestinians. But where was he born? Where does he come from? Rabin was born in Jerusalem. So he wasn't come from the East Europe, but he actually came from Palestine. But it says his mother, or Meir, was born in Shuttle in near present-day Ukraine, Pale of Settlement. So they came from Pale of Settlement. What is a Pale of Settlement? According to the internet maps, this is Pale of Settlement. This is Eastern Europe, and most of these so-called Israelis have actually come from this region in Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland, which collectively makes the Pale of Settlement. Originally, it was part of Russia. It was the western border of Russian Empire, and most of the Jewish people were kind of told to stay within the Pale of Settlement. They were not allowed outside of settlement in this area. So basically, the Pale of Settlement came into existence during the rule of Catherine the Great in 1791. That is when the Russians had anti-Jewish, you can say, brought in anti-Jewish laws and etc. But why did they do that? Alexander II, who ruled from 1855 to 1881, he tried to be a little bit more, to take a softer approach towards the Jews. And many Jews actually thought that maybe the Pale of Settlement would end soon. These hopes were vanished when Alexander II was assassinated in 1881. Rumors spread that he had been assassinated by Jews. But in the aftermath of anti-Jewish sentiment skyrocketed. Anti-Jewish pogroms rocked the country from 1881 to 1884. But the problem is, still the question in my mind is, where exactly have the Jews actually come from? Were they always part of Eastern Europe, or have they come from somewhere else? This article does shed some light on the roots of Russian anti-Semitism. It says, according to Rabin, anti-Semitism during the Middle Ages was based more on the religion itself, often referred to as Judeophobia. Jews typically lived separately from the rest of society and were very isolated. In medieval times, Jews lived in exile or diaspora and formed closed autonomous communities. As a result, outsiders were suspicious of this great group of people because of their different behavior. However, because of several writings done by the church fathers, Shredden says that the Jews were considered to be an integral component of the last days and were necessary for the second coming of the Messiah. Throughout the centuries, as more countries in Western Europe started to grant emancipation, freedom to their Jewish population, Jews were able to become more integrated into the overall society. Some European thinkers started to develop the idea that emancipation was a mistake and led to the rise of the Jews and demise of Europeans. This is how they explain the crisis, says Shredden. The emancipation violated and destroyed the balance. They are being dominated by the minor foreign element, which was the Jews. Later on, during the times of Imperial Russia, the various Tsars did not give the Jews much freedom and required them to live in the Pale of Settlement, which included modern-day Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, much of Ukraine, eastern Latvia, eastern Poland, and the western border of Russia. This area existed with varying borders from 1791 to 1917 and was created by the Tsarina Catherine the Great. For Jews, these years were plagued with pogroms which were attacked on Jewish shuttles, as well as many other restrictions and problems that prevented them from rising in society. But that still doesn't say where actually the Jews came from. One possible explanation is given by Arthur Koestler, who himself is a Jew. He argues that these Jews who are actually from Khazaria, he says Khazar Empire, a major but almost forgotten power in the Eastern Europe, which in the Dark Ages became converted to Judaism, Khazaria was finally wiped out by the forces of Genghis Khan. But evidence indicates that Khazars themselves migrated to Poland and formed the cradle of Western Jewry. So he does not think that these Jews are actually from Bani Israel. His argument is that these are the 13th tribe who actually converted to Judaism. And where is the Khazar Empire? Well, according to the information he provides in the book, the Khazar Empire was above the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. This is the Black Sea, that's the Caspian Sea, and this in between is the Caucasian mountains, Caucasia, where Georgia is, etc., and This is the Russian side of it. So his argument is that when the Mongols came, these people from Khazaria actually moved westward and settled in Poland and other East European countries. Interesting. This is information in the Wikipedia about Arthur Koestler, who was Hungarian British. Koestler was born in Budapest to Jewish parents, and he was the only child. But what is interesting is that he had both Hungarian and British nationalities. It is worth mentioning here that Arthur Koestler's thesis is not widely accepted. It is a controversial one, and not everybody agrees that the Jews actually came from Khazaria, but many people do believe it. So, something interesting here. It says, about the time when Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the West, the western confines of Europe between the Caucasus and the Volga were ruled by a Jewish state known as the Khazar Empire. At the peak of its empire from the 7th to the 10th century AD, it played a significant part in shaping the destinies of medieval and consequently of modern Europe. But what is more interesting is the country of Khazars and our people of Turkish stock occupied a strategic key position at the vital gateway between the Black Sea and Caspian, where the great eastern powers of the period confronted each other. Very interesting. The question I kept asking during this video and still occupying my mind is how and why they came to occupy Palestine. Well, Dr. Syed Mujahid Kamran, who happens to be was the Vice Chancellor of Punjab University in Pakistan. He is actually quite a literary person, has written many books, etc. But what is most interesting is this article which he has written in July of this year. And in the article, he says, it is extremely important to grasp that Zionism, communism, the two world wars, and the creation of Israel are interconnected. And his argument is that it's actually the bankers who were actually doing it all. It was also highly significant that the Zionist Illuminati bankers provided funds for the overthrow of the Tsar. These Illuminati Zionist international bankers were also behind Zionism. In 1881, Edmond de Rothschild of Paris began purchasing land in Palestine. He then provided funds for settling Jews in Palestine, particularly in Tel Aviv. But what I also found interesting is comments by Lenin, who also was a Jew, and he was the leader of the revolutionaries in Russia. Our power does not know liberty or justice. It is entirely established on the destruction of divided individual will. We are the masters. Complete indifference to suffering is our duty. In the fulfillment of our calling, the greater cruelty is a merit. Through a systematic terror during which every breach of contract, every treason, every lie will be lawful, we will find the way to abase humanity down to the lowest level of existence. This is indispensable to the establishment of our dominance. Very powerful ideas, very powerful thoughts. Very scary too. But what I found interesting is this. The Jews might have had Uganda, Madagascar, and other places for establishment of a Jewish fatherland, but they wanted absolutely nothing except Palestine. Not because the Dead Sea water by evaporation can produce $5 trillion of metalloids and powdered metals, not because the subsoil of Palestine contains 20 times more petroleum than all the combined reserves of the two Americas, but Palestine is at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, because Palestine constitutes the veritable center of world political power, the strategic center for world control. So it is about wealth, global control, and global power. This was indeed affirmed by Henry H. Klein, who, despite being Jewish, not only suffered character assassination, but also assassination attempts at the hands of Zionists. Klein, in his pamphlet Zionism Rules the World, shortly before his suicide in 1955 in New York, Zionism is a political program for the conquest of the world. Zionism destroyed Russia by violence as a warning to other nations. It is destroying the United States through bankruptcy, as Lenin advised. Zionism wants another world war, if necessary, to enslave the people. Our manpower is scattered over the world. Will we be destroyed from within, or will we wake up in time to prevent it? Quite an alarming and quite powerful statements about the future plans and intentions. Let's see what happens. I published an article in 2008. The title was An Explication of the Mind of the Jew, a book review of Jerusalem in the Quran by Imran Hussain. Okay. And in there, I mentioned that Jews have been quite successfully seduced by Zionism to gather together in Palestine, and they were deceived by their leaders and now have only themselves to blame. Israel's European allies have so far shown no desire at all to take the Jews back. In fact, the Europeans are happy that the Jews have moved out of Europe. This is evident by the strong European support of Israel, which is effectively a signal to the Jews that they are not welcome to return to Europe. As everyone knows, the Jews have a long history of being expelled from Europe and elsewhere. But it is clear that now no nation, rich or poor, will likely come forward and show their willingness to host the Jewish people when Israel does in fact disintegrate. So what will happen to the Jews after Israel disintegrates? Will it disintegrate after 20 years? Lastly, what is interesting, and I'm coming back to the point raised by Arthur Koestler, is that the Khazaria, which he points out here, are actually people of Turkish stock, he says, which means that they cannot be Semites. That's a very interesting point, because the Semites are actually Arabs and the Persians, not the Turkish. The Turks are actually the descendants of Japheth, not Sam, the children of Noah. So, very interesting point raised by Koestler. But then again, not all the academics actually agree with Arthur Koestler. So, who knows what is truth? Only Allah knows.